Hello, I'm Dr. Cara Courage. I'm the editor of the Routledge Handbook of Placemaking. And in this short presentation, I'm going to introduce the idea behind the handbook and how I curated it along with my fellow section editors. And then I'll talk about my take on placemaking, my definition of it, my understanding of it as a community of practice, and I'll close with some thoughts on the future of placemaking. So basically giving you a précis of the introduction that I give in the handbook itself. So it's been a decade since Anne Marcuson and Anne Gadwar and the National Endowment for Arts in the States published their Creative Placemaking white paper. And that really marked an evolution for the placemaking sector that spoke to that practice at that time. We've got new, really vital demands made of placemaking now, and perhaps a dilution of practice seen in some respects. And as we arrive now in this decade, it's an apposite time, I think, to evaluate where placemaking is, critique its past, present and future. Now, when I say that I feel placemaking has been diluted, I speak to the multitude of homogenous practices that if you were to be just placed in them, you wouldn't necessarily know where you are in the world. And I feel that this practice is really the antithesis of certainly what I feel placemaking is. And I'll talk about that in a bit. But I also think it's now time to make a claim for a better placemaking, a practice that is out there already that is perhaps being silenced, being drowned out by a dominant and normative placemaking narrative. We're also at a time, of course, where placemaking projects have been lived in now for a number of years, and we can have, therefore, a live narrative of their successes and failures. And we have urgent issues of climate, ecological, racial, social, economic, political, justice issues, all of which have a place-based aspect to them. And placemaking has a duty to respond to this and to respond with integrity. So the book is necessarily a collective endeavour, and I reached out to a group of people that represent a 360-degree view of placemaking practice, of placemaking theory and of its research. This group are the section editors of the handbook, and together we brought together just over 50, absolutely incredible contributors that again speak from all aspects and all subject positions of placemaking. The book was curated, and that curation for me was a very intentional act. The sections move through a narrative arc of a history of placemaking and then a critique of placemaking, through to a practice application, through to its evaluation and research of placemaking. And each section is placed into its own particular context by a preface from the section editor. And the themes, the topics, the issues in those sections and in those chapters, of course, overlap, such is the nature of any complex and multivariate practice. So I've also presented the handbook through a series of topics, and this list is given alongside at the head of the book the more traditional table of contents, and each chapter also closes with a list of relevant chapters for further reading. And I partly did this because I know what it's like as a reader to look at a handbook table of contents and be so overwhelmed and you just don't know where to start. And you're only really able to rely on, the chapter headers to help you through it. So my aim in this curated approach is to help the reader navigate the handbook from their own purview. So coming into it from whatever your particular interest is and getting straight to the information that you need, and then being guided through the content from that position, but also to content that perhaps you may not have initially considered. So these are the sections, the 7 sections and their editors, and a massive thank you to them and to all the contributors for the dedication to this project that they've had and the exemplary content and commentary that we have therein. And these are the curated topics from an A to almost Z, arts to wellbeing and healing. And the voices we have through the handbook are global. They speak from a variety of knowledges and subject positions, and they represent a diverse and innovative thinking and practice that are truly extending placemaking today. So I'm going to talk now about what is placemaking and what I hold as a definition of placemaking, and one that for me in putting the handbook together was really foundational in its curation, and I think an understanding of placemaking that all the contributors hold to as well. So placemaking for me, it's more than just planning and designing spaces or putting an art process through them. That really, that's the work of urban design, of architecture, of public art, and so on, those sibling sectors to placemaking. But for me, placemaking is a deeper and more holistic practice, and that's also for me where its real radical potential lies. So placemaking for me uses the existing aspects of a place to their best effect and facilitates creative patterns of activities and connections, whether they be cultural, economic, social, environmental, that define a place and support its ongoing evolution. And most importantly, and this is what I feel sets placemaking apart from other place disciplines, the community is front and centre of this. So the moment you take the community out of this as both spearheading the process and as equal stakeholders in the process, this process is then not placemaking, and the radical potential of this place-based process for me is then completely lost. I'm going to talk now about a consideration of placemaking as a community of practice. There is a section on this in my introduction to the handbook, so I'm not going to go through it in a huge amount of detail. But I think, I mention it here to perhaps offer you a framing that you might consider in your own place in relation to placemaking. So succinctly, as Wenger, one of the people who came up with the idea of community of practice, the definition is it's a group of people who share a common concern or passion for something they do and learn how to do it as they interact regularly. And in that sense, yes, they're a kind of surface look at placemaking. We're doing all of those things globally. So yes, we're a community of practice. I don't disagree with that necessarily. But I think for the good of placemaking's ethical development and its practice development, we all need to recognise that it is a really complex and contested and negotiated field where you can have wholly antithetical practices viewed along a sort of a spectrum of a practice, coming from different intentional positions and holding different definitions of what placemaking is, and I of course include myself in that. And for me, I think that's also really indicative of how much of a new practice placemaking is, and it's still working out in a way what it is. And this working out, of course, it's an ongoing task, it's a critical task. And this is where I turn to you to consider what knowledge you bring to this community and what experiences, tools, what languages, what knowledges, what problem-solving skills do you have to help form this community of practice as we go into this next decade of placemaking. And then that brings me on to the last section of the introduction to the handbook, this what next for placemaking. So truly for me, placemaking, it's up to the artists, the practitioners, the communities out there to define what placemaking is, to define who works with it and who it works for, what it should be, what it shouldn't be, just as all of those people together are working now to make their places what they want them to be. Placemaking has evolved through collaboration, gathering new constituents of practitioners and professions along the way, and it's become increasingly cognizant of its political implications and its agency. So to be a true ally to all citizens and to respond to the times of crisis that we are in and that we have facing us, we have to have an honest look at past and present practice of placemaking to create that future practice of placemaking. And as we sit here looking at that next decade, that next 10 years, we have challenges posed for society and that have a place and placemaking implication. And while placemaking alone can't change the conditions that produce and maintain structural inequalities, from climate emergency, ageing populations, poor mental health, systemic inequality, social segregation, and the place-based aspects of those. As placemakers, I do feel that we have to ask ourselves if we are fit for purpose. If we're fit for purpose to serve our communities and places that we work in, and to co-create real and integrative solutions to the most pressing concerns that we have of contemporary and future living. And it's that concern that is the concern of the handbook. And I really hope, I think all of us that are part of the handbook hope that you find it a useful tool for you, and a useful handbook for you to inform the placemaking that you do. So I hope that you enjoy it. We all hope that you enjoy it. And thank you very much.